You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Welcome back. Over the summer, Governor Pritzker vetoed a bill that would have given Ameren first dibs on any high-capacity transmission line projects going forward in the state. A crucial project as the state tries to build out its energy grid with more renewable sources of energy. But this week, Ameren decided to give up on their attempt to override that veto. They held an announcement with the IBEW union as well to talk about how they're giving up on their efforts for the fall, but they're going to restart in the spring. Joining us now is Brian McDaniel, Director of Government Affairs for the Citizens Utility Board. Thank you so much for joining us, Brian.
Thank you for having me.
So this was an interesting process. Governor Pritzker, before this bill was even passed, made it clear he was going to veto it if it made it to his desk. He followed through on that, but we've seen a push from utilities and unions about this particular bill. They wanted to have this veto overridden. And I wonder, just what is it about this bill that is so, it makes it such a tough sell?
Well, like I say, at its heart, this bill is about money, and more money. That's what this bill's about. And that's why the utility companies would like to have a monopoly on the transmission, the coming transmission bill that's going to occur. So, for example, in Ameren's territory, about over $3 billion in transmission projects are scheduled. And so we believe, as a consumer group, CUB, that these projects ought to be bid between transmission companies so that consumers can realize the lowest price when it comes to building out this transmission.
So that was part of the reason that the governor vetoed this. But we saw this push, and it was really interesting to see unions get in on this, because there's this relationship between Ameren, between utility companies and unions. But were you surprised to see labor unions support this, the IBEW particularly, support this so strongly rather than going a potentially different route with it?
Well, like I say, Ameren and their unions work closely together, because when Ameren wins, the unions win, right? Jobs, and more jobs. So that's the union's argument around this line. CUB is fine with unions. Union labor, that's a good thing, okay? We're talking about the cost to consumers when it comes to bidding out these transmission lines so that these lines can be built at the lowest possible cost to consumers, because there's going to be a lot of build out of transmission, and that's not a bad thing. We need transmission. We need new transmission to move some of these renewables around on the grid and help people realize lower bills in the long run.
There was a lot of talk about how this bill came about in the spring. It was introduced and passed very quickly. It did not have unanimous support by any means, but there was this conversation around, giving utility companies that kind of power in the state. And Ameren is not ComEd. Ameren has not had the same issues that ComEd has had here in the building, but it's still, what did those optics say around this entire process? There was no real buildup to this, at least in the public. It was introduced, it was passed, and then the governor vetoed it in the summer.
Well, I think it's important to remember when it comes to Ameren, they worked with ComEd hand in glove during all the scandal years to win the same things ComEd won for themselves, which was a formula rate and investments in smart grid. What happened with the bill in the spring, there was an energy bill that had been put together, and then at the very end of the session, all of a sudden, this amendment was added for Ameren. And there wasn't much discussion on it, and it was jammed through. And thank you to the legislators in the House that voted no and really helped us sustain the governor's veto. And thank you for the governor for vetoing this bill that would have raised costs for consumers and given the utility another monopoly on top of the one they already have.
It was a very interesting press conference this week when we heard from IBEW, we heard from Ameren, we heard from lawmakers in the Public Utility Committee. This was by no means we're giving up on this entirely. The conversation around right to first refusal is going to come back in the spring. It's going to have probably a bigger buildup to it. And we also heard from the chair of the committee that they don't want to apply it just to Ameren. This would go broadly to other utility companies. From your perspective, to have that includes ComEd, that includes all utility companies in the state. What kind of signal does that send to people, when we're talking about a time where utility rates are rising consistently for consumers?
Well, listen, utilities have a lot of money and power, and, they get things done in Springfield. That's why I come here, to try to serve as a voice for consumers. AARP has been a big help in this fight. Attorney General came out opposed to this bill, which was a big help. So again, a statewide ROFR would not be a good thing. And it doesn't surprise me that ComEd wants a monopoly on transmission, just like Ameren almost had for themselves. It's a no-brainer that a utility would want more monopoly, more money. And again, that's what this bill's about. It's about all the billions of dollars in transmission that's coming into the state, and the utility wants to control all of it. And that's going to lead to higher costs for consumers, and that's why the governor vetoed this bill. And I want to thank the members of the General Assembly and the House who stood with us and help us uphold the governor's veto.
Are there going to be conversations going forward? Because right now we know labor unions and utilities are working hand in hand on this particular issue, but is there going to be a conversation going forward? We heard from Ann Williams, Representative Ann Williams. She mentioned that there's definitely a path forward for making sure labor is involved in these projects going forward without giving utilities that monopoly. And is that something that you could see going forward, that is okay, that is the way to do this?
Well, Cole, the negotiations haven't happened, but I was heartened to hear the Chair Williams' comments on the issue. For CUB, it's a cost, a dollars and cents issue. As far as the labor goes, Illinois is a union state. That's a good thing. We're not opposed to that. But for us, it comes down to dollars and cents, and the idea that these transmission lines need to be bid on the front end, and so that the company that can do it for the lowest cost is the one that ends up doing the work.
What kind of impact could we potentially see on an average person's utility bill if that level of competition isn't there? You already mentioned the amount of investment that's going into these particular projects. The state's going to build out wind and solar. It's going to continue to build out its energy grid. These transmission lines are necessary, are needed to connect it to the rest of the grid. What kind of impact could this have if those prices aren't, brought down by competition?
Well, it's going to have an impact because transmission, if it's not merchant transmission, if it's transmission built and put on our utility bills, it's going to have an impact because transmission lines are recovered on our utility bills. Again, unless it's a merchant line, and in that case, the people that put the power on the line pay for the bill, the line. In this case, these are not merchant transmission lines. These are lines that are going to be recovered on our utility bills. The rate of return on these transmission lines is already very high, over 10%. And so it's going to have a real effect on consumers' bills if, Ameren's overpaying by hundreds of millions of dollars on transmission lines because they're the monopoly and these lines aren't being bid out to see if there could be another transmission company that could do it for a lower cost and save consumers money.
Before I let you go, I want to talk to you about one other issue. Right now, through the ICC, there is a potential rate hike coming on natural gas for utilities, all of them in the state, advocating for a higher utility rate. An administrative judge at the ICC approved it, but it needs that final okay from the ICC. Is this a necessary raise? Are utility companies right in saying that this needs to happen, or is this, just another not tax, but another charge that consumers are going to have to face?
Well, utilities make their money through our delivery rates. The supply part of the bill, the natural gas charge, they're not allowed to make money off the price of natural gas. Luckily, the price of natural gas has come down a lot from where it was. That's helped lower our natural gas bills, and it's helped lower our electric bills because a lot of gas is used to generate electricity. So no, we don't think this rate hike is necessary. The utilities, the gas utilities in particular, have had a surcharge called the Qualified Infrastructure Plant Surcharge. It'd be QIP on your bill. They've had that for a decade. We fought that when it came into effect. We've had a campaign going for years now to try to get rid of it. That surcharge is set to expire at the end of this year. And so that surcharge has, over the last decade, has enabled gas utilities to spend money a lot faster than they would have otherwise. Because when gas utilities spend money and invest in the system, those investments are recovered from ratepayers. And so this surcharge that's been on the bill for the last 10 years has enabled just runaway spending by gas utilities. And now here they are again for another rate increase. And so no, we don't think, especially the gas utilities, need this type of rate increase, or the electric. A lot of it has to do with their profit rate. The gas utility wants a very high profit rate. And the way utility regulation works is that you have something called rate base, which is the poles, wires, pipes, right? And then they earn a percentage, or their profit is based on a percentage of their rate base. Well, that means they have an incentive to grow their rate base as large as possible, because that also grows their profits as large as possible for shareholders, and that's what Wall Street likes, right? Trying to increase dividends. But the problem is that's all happening on the backs of Illinois ratepayers, and enough is enough. It's been a wonderful decade for utilities in this state, and it's time for the good times to come to an end, because the people of this state are getting to the point where they can't afford it.
What's the opportunity going forward? The ICC vote is expected before the end of the year. And what's the opportunity for CUB to make their arguments, or for the public to get involved in this process and try to make their voices heard?
Yes, you can go to cubhelpcenter.com and you can file. We can help you file comments in the actual dockets that the judges would see before they make their decision. That's one way. CUB also has a lawyer that goes to the Commerce Commission and presents, does oral arguments if there are oral arguments, files briefs on exceptions, proposed orders, along with other consumer advocates. The Attorney General is there fighting for people. AARP has intervened in these cases. So yes, there's people out there fighting for you, and to the extent you're able to make your voice heard, that always helps. cubhelpcenter.com. I know people sometimes don't think it does, but the more decision makers hear from people that are affected by their decisions, the better.
Got it. All right, well, Brian McDaniel with the Citizens Utility Board, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Cole. I appreciate the time.
When we come back, we'll take a look at a proposal for Governor Pritzker for an entirely new state agency. We'll be right back.